Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Kaplowitz. Some of you know me as a finance professor. I am also the co-founder and executive director of the Rutgers Center for Women in Business, where through education, opportunity, and thought leadership, we do three things. We remove barriers, we build community, and we empower women with confidence and skills to succeed as business leaders. I am so excited to be here today with Matt Blumberg, who is the CEO and founder of Bolster, which is an on-demand talent network that connects startups and scale-up CEOs to experienced C-level talent for fractional advisory and board roles. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. Good to be here.
Awesome. Before we get into it, I just want to go through a couple housekeeping things. First of all, we want the chat to be engaged. This is really for all of you, and tiny secret, I'm going to get a little self-help session as well. I'm particularly interested in this one personally too. And so we've been listening to you. A lot of you in our community have been asking for, how do I get on boards? What do I do? How do I prepare? I might not be there. Do I need a C in my title? And so we're going to delve into all of that and more today. But we also are very adept at monitoring the chat. So we're going to ebb and flow. Matt's done this a lot as well. And we're going to really cater to what you want and need to know to get to that role that you want to have. So with that, I want to turn it over to Matt to introduce himself and talk a little bit about Bolster.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I was just telling Lisa up front, I spent 4 very happy years of my life in central New Jersey, just a little bit down the road from Rutgers, a little bit further south on Route 1. I love the work that you all are doing, and happy to be here today. So just to give you my background real quickly, I've been a CEO of a few different technology companies over the years. So have spent a lot more of my time in sort of the startup and scale up ecosystem, and sort of built several different businesses. Bolster, as Lisa described it, is an online marketplace for executives. So we connect senior executives with CEOs of startups and scale ups. And we connect them for all sorts of different roles, from full-time to part-time, to project to board seats. So we've probably done in the last year 30 to 40 searches for board members for our clients. So I spend a lot of time in and around the startup ecosystem and in and around boards and talking to other CEOs. I've also been on a bunch of boards and am currently on a public board, a couple private boards, and a nonprofit board. But I've also served on community boards and education-oriented boards and trade association boards, and have written a couple of ebooks about boards, which I think will give you, everyone here, a link to one of them called How to Succeed in Your First Board Role. And actually have a book coming out in 4 weeks, published by Wiley, called Startup Boards. So I spend a lot of time in and around this topic, and happy to be here with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's start out easy, especially for folks who maybe think this is all kind of scary. And I know it's different. And I love the fact that you've had such a diverse experience on different kind of boards, nonprofits, for-profits, community-based, et cetera. But just generally, what do directors do on these boards? What are their main roles and responsibilities? What are they expected to do and know?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's a really wide range of activities that you can do as a board member, and it totally depends on the type of organization, the size of the board, who the leader is, whether it's the CEO or executive director or chairman, for-profit, nonprofit, et cetera. But I would say that there are a couple things that they all have in common. You are first and foremost responsible in part for the governance and oversight of the organization. And I'll come back to that in a second. And I would say second, you are responsible for being a strategic sounding board for the organization. And then beyond that, different boards will ask different things of people, but let's just focus on those two because I think they're sort of common to everything. The governance and oversight of an organization sounds very legal and mysterious, and like if you've never done it before is impossible to do. It's actually not. It means you are responsible for being the, sort of accountability check on the management team. It means you're responsible for taking actions and conducting yourself in ways that are consistent with the company's governing documents, their charter, their bylaws, things like that. So there is kind of a legal element to it, but from a practical perspective, that's not hard. If you're on a board and there's a really tricky governance question, there's going to be a lawyer in the room advising people on how to think about it, not telling you what to do, but advising you on sort of the different trade-offs or different decision paths on it. But the governance and oversight aspect is pretty important. The reality is everybody needs a boss. CEOs need a boss too. And if you're on a board that's a corporate board, you're representing the shareholders. If you're on a nonprofit board, you're kind of representing the mission because there really are no shareholders. It's holding the leaders of the organization accountable every day to their boss, whether the boss is the mission or the boss is shareholders.
No, I think that's really important. I want to add one more thing in there because I know when I was an executive at startup companies, as CFO, you also become the corporate secretary. And one of the things that I always made sure was paid was our directors and officers insurance. And that I think gives folks an extra level of protection that the company pays for, but indemnifies directors and officers as long as you're acting prudently and within your fiduciary duty to not be personally liable.
Yeah, that's right. And that's to skip around the topics here, but if you ever get invited to be on a board, make sure they have directors and officers insurance.
Right.
If you're joining a board of a public company, they do for sure. You can find out how much. If you're joining the board of a private company that has an institutional investor like a venture capital firm or a private equity firm, they do as well. It doesn't hurt to ask the question. If you're the first board member being invited to join a company that hasn't raised venture capital yet, they might not. And it might be worth poking them to do that. It doesn't necessarily cost them a lot of money. But the governance aspect of the job, like I said, occasionally it pops up. It can be very tricky when it does. It usually comes with advice. There are a few simple rules also, which are not worth going into detail on today. There are fiduciary responsibilities, duty of care, duty of loyalty. Each one of these is like a paragraph you have to read and internalize, but all of it comes down to you need to exercise good judgment on behalf of the business and its shareholders and stakeholders, and that's an important part of the job of being a director. Strategic sounding board is what it sounds like. And I'll tell you from the perspective of a CEO at the moment, not necessarily of a director, but I lead my organization. And I always think of myself as having two teams. I have a leadership team and I have a board. And I think of my board very much as a team that is there to help the organization with not just oversight, but making sure we're on the right track. I really try to get the most out of each of my board members when it comes to the strategy of the business, because they have a very special role to play and vantage point to take. My leadership team and I are in the business 24/7. And the board is 1 foot in and 1 foot out because they're not in the business every day. They're not employees. They come to board meetings, they get updates from me regularly. We meet periodically between meetings. So they know enough about what's going on to be really helpful, but they're not mired in the details. So that ability to help, to help a management team with sort of that outside, but not entirely outside view is a critical part of being a board member, I think, of any organization. Those two things, I think, go across all types. If you want to get into like what's a private company board do versus a public company versus a nonprofit, there's a lot of interesting differences there to tease out.
Yeah, and I think we might get there if we have some time later on. I think personally, I think the strategy part is infinitely more fun. What kind of time commitment are we talking about? And can you talk for a second? Obviously, nonprofit boards, you pay for the privilege. Maybe it's not obvious. You pay for the privilege of supporting that mission. But for for-profit boards, how does the money work?
So you should always expect to be compensated for board service if you're on a corporate board. That compensation will look very different if it's a public company or a private company. For private companies, the compensation you can expect is 100% stock options. You are highly, highly, highly unlikely to get cash compensation. There are times where you can be a board member for a private company and also consult to them, but you're getting paid for consulting work. You're not getting paid for the directorship. So the directorship will come with stock options. They will normally vest over some period of time, could be 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. There's lots of depth that I can go into about like how to think about that, different terms, what to ask for, but it's only going to be stock options. And you have to think of those as, especially if you're not familiar with how startups work, you have to think of that a little bit as a lottery ticket. Not every company turns into Facebook. The people that were early directors at Facebook, good for them. There are plenty of private companies where the stock options at the end of the day are worth zero.
I've been at those.
Yeah, I've been at those too. And I've been on both ends of that, not the Facebook scale, but I've been on boards where I was only on the board for a year or two, and then they got acquired by Google, and it was wonderful. And I've been on boards and worked my butt off for 4 years, and the company's options were underwater when they got acquired. And it's just sort of the nature of the beast. That's really different from public boards, where there is sort of a much better defined series of benchmarks around compensation based on the size of the company. You can expect as a director of a public board to get a mix of cash compensation and equity. The equity will take different formats, but frequently it's RSUs, which basically are cash. I mean, they show up in the form of stock that just ends up in your account that you can sell if you want, as opposed to options you have to exercise. Sometimes they are options you have to exercise. And then there's cash comp, and the cash comp will vary with the size of the business and also with your role on the board. So I'm on a public board right now. I just had this conversation with my wife the other day because I just joined this board about a year ago, and I had been getting a check from them every quarter, which is not that big, but something. And like the check was different last quarter. And it was different last quarter because I joined the audit committee. And so I got extra money for being on the audit committee. This quarter, they made me the chair of the board. So like the check's going to be a little bit bigger. For most public companies, cash compensation is not enormous. Small, mid-cap public companies, the cash compensation will be somewhere between, I don't know, $25,000 a year and $50,000 a year. It's not bad, but you can't make a living on it. Large public boards, if you're talking about, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 type companies, you could be seeing cash comp of 100 to maybe even 200,000 a year, and you can make a living out of that if you're on 4 of them or 3 of them or even 2 of them. But those board seats are few and far between, and that may be a good topic to cover as well. Sort of like, what does the landscape look like for board seats?
Yeah. Before we get to that, because I think that's important, what kind of time commitment would we expect? Because, unless you have 4 of these, right, you probably need to supplement your income in other ways. So what are the expectations? And know it's different, and maybe talk for a second about the different committees, like the comp committee and the audit committee and some of those others that probably do require a little bit more time, which is why you're paid more.
Yeah, it's definitely for most mortals, it's a don't quit your day job kind of scenario. With private companies, the time commitment is generally not all that huge. And most CEOs of private companies, when they're hiring an independent director, will really try to make it a reasonable time commitment. So I would say you have a board member, you have a board meeting every quarter, typically. At a private company, call it 4 hours. Most of us are not traveling for board meetings anymore. Maybe you're traveling once a year if the board's not where you're located. But if you take that out, you have a meeting every quarter that's 4 hours. You have to spend a couple hours preparing for it and maybe an hour doing follow-up from it, and probably an hour or 2 or 3 of work between meetings to do some work with the CEO or meet with someone on the management team or advise them on something. Again, not big consulting, but some exercise of your expertise in service of the organization. And committee work for private boards is not that great. Audit committees typically meet once a year and they piggyback it on a board meeting, and the same thing for comp committees. So I think if you roll it all up for a private company, you're probably talking about 40 hours a year. So you can do one or two of those and, not notice it in the scheme of your job. It might even be a little bit less than that. It kind of depends on the company. Public companies are a heavier lift, for sure. So the meetings may not be any longer, and there aren't necessarily more of them, but the other responsibilities take more time. So I'm on the audit committee of this public company, and we meet every time they're doing an earnings call and releasing the 10Q or the 10K, and we're reviewing that stuff. So it's not an annual thing; it becomes a quarterly thing. Compensation committee is not quite so bad for public companies either, but the amount of governance and oversight basically goes up. So the time commitment probably goes up. And then, larger public boards, when they meet, they're meeting for 2 days or a full day. So I would say the time commitment on a public board is probably double. And then if you're doing something like chairing an audit committee of a public board, that is a lot of time. So you get paid more for that. But if you're a former CFO, for example, and you get hired to chair an audit committee of a public company, that's a real piece of work.
That's like another job. No, I think that's important. And then also I know from friends that are on public boards, if it has anything to do with a multi-location business, like a retailer or a restaurant, there probably are going to be site visits tied into some of that stuff as well, which could increase the time. Whether you think those industries are fun or not, then maybe it's not such a big deal.
Yeah, and look, you also have to expect, particularly with public companies, that once in a while something pops up and it just consumes an enormous amount of your time, and there's nothing you can do about it. A good friend of mine's on the Twitter board. He's really busy right now.
Yeah, I would think so.
He has a day job, so those hostile takeovers don't happen every day to companies, but sometimes there are sort of significant events, and you really do have to be then like on the daily call or the weekly call. So
yeah. M&A activity, you go back to banking hours, and no matter what role you have at that company, I think that's expected. I want to step back a little bit. A lion's share of what we do at our center really focuses on elevating mid-career women. And, as folks approach, thinking about boards, a lot of times, I say this when I was an executive as well, we can't think about strategy 5 years from now because, what we're going to do in 5 years, because it's too late at that point. So, want to start thinking about what can we be doing now when we might not be trying to apply to boards yet, but we're thinking it's something we want to do. It's on our list of accomplishments that we want to have. So I guess the first question is, do I need a C in my title?
I think the answer to that is probably no, but it sort of depends what kind of board you're looking at. But if you're thinking about a private company board, an earlier stage company, you're probably not going to be on their board or asked to join their board if you're not a senior leader in an organization. But that doesn't necessarily have to come with a C title. It probably has to come with a VP title at least. I'm trying to think of all the board placements we've done. I'm not sure there's anyone who hasn't been at least a VP. But that's probably the way to think about it.
Okay. No, that's helpful. Also, what we talk a lot about networking, peer networking versus networking with more senior level folks. How important is building my network now? And what should I specifically be doing, or who should I be engaging with, knowing I don't want to look like a social climber at the same time? The equivalent of a business social climber, right?
Right. So look, I think networking is one of the most important things that people can do in their career, period. So I think it serves you well, whether you're focused on someday getting a board seat or just focused on growing your own career. But it's certainly relevant to not just to getting on a board, but being an effective board member. One of the things that board members do, particularly for earlier stage companies, is make introductions. So the broader your network, the more likely you are to to find yourself with board opportunities and then to be successful at them. for sure. But I would say that to me, if I think about, what are the things that we at Bolster tell our members are steps to be board ready? That's one of them, but that's sort of the table stakes one.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. What else should I be doing? Right, I'm probably not going to get on a public company board, I'm assuming, without having any kind of board experience whatsoever. So do I start with nonprofits? Do I start with community-based? Do I start with private? Like, how should we think about it, right? Because it's not just a self-help session for Lisa Kaplowitz, but how should we think about going about this?
Yeah. So by the way, we have placed people on public boards who have not had prior board experience, but you have to be board ready. And obviously one way of being board ready is I've been on a board, but there are lots of other things that can get you to that point. And here are a few of them. So one, as you said, like, yes, being on a nonprofit board or a community board, that counts. And this is one thing I just can't emphasize enough. People tend to really mentally discount that stuff in themselves. Oh, all I did was, run the PTA. Well, God, that's a lot of work. Oh, I was on the school board. Okay, that's a lot of work. So I would not at all discount, that service on other types of boards. It's a little different, but at least you've been around a board table. You know what it's like to hold a leader of an organization accountable. You know what it's like to review a budget and a P&L. So that is one thing that's quite important. I think another thing that we point to quite a bit as a measure of board readiness is, have you had a lot of interactions with a board? So you may not have been a CEO or a board member, but if you've been on an executive team and you've been invited into the boardroom every quarter or every other quarter to do a presentation on the state of your area of the business or ask for funding for something, at least you have experience with boards and you know the kinds of things that that boards ask and sort of what that looks like. So that's a very useful thing. I think another thing is, have you been an advisor to a company or to a CEO? And there are ways of doing that are formal, and there are ways of doing that are informal. There are plenty of advisory networks and mentor networks out there, whether they're things like Techstars for startups, or there are tons of other websites that sort of connect advisors with companies, including Bolster. Anything you can do to sort of have on your resume that, no, I have taken time to advise a CEO, and that is a reference I can give you about the advice that that I've provided and sort of what that interaction was like. All those things are sort of helpful steps in board readiness. The last thing, which is in some ways I actually think it's the least impactful, but it's the easiest one to put on a resume sometimes, is going through some sort of formal board or governance training. So there are a lot of opportunities for that out there. I'm not sure if Rutgers has any programs like that. Some business schools do
right now. It's something we're thinking about, but we haven't launched anything.
There are versions of that. I think we maintain a list of that at Bolster. Maybe Andrea or Kathy can either post that or send that around afterwards. There are a lot of them out there, and some of them are $10,000 and you have to spend 3 days, and some of them are $100 and it's 4 hours. But it just gives you sort of a deeper sense of what it's like to be a board member.
Would you think that's I do that because I don't have any of these other experiences and it's more educational for me, or does it actually give you kind of that stamp, that piece of paper that you are more board ready? Not naming any programs.
Yeah. Like I said, it's one that's sort of easy to list on a resume. I don't know how much notice it gets, but it's nothing bad happens from having it. And potentially, potentially is like one more thing.
Right. But it costs money. So, I'm a finance professor. So is there an ROI on it?
Yeah. I mean, some of them cost $100.
Right.
So, it's hard to say if there's an ROI on it. It's not as good as having been on a board, but a nice add to your board resume if you haven't.
Got it. What else besides interacting with boards, advising? What about our social media presence, or writing a book, or publishing? articles, like how valuable is that, being that thought leader, and how big of a thought leader do you really need to be in order for it to make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, look, thought leadership and social media presence, which frequently go together, are very good things. You certainly want to be in a position where if someone runs across your name as a potential candidate for a board and Googles you, that something interesting comes up. How it works proactively instead of reactively, so it's a little harder to say. You would have to really make yourself one of the top X thought leaders in field,
right?
For a CEO or a board to say, oh, we should get that person on the board. So look, if you're in a position where you can do that, and even if you're talking about a micro field or a subfield, by all means, that's going to help. I would sort of bucket all of that as things that you may be doing in your career anyway, as you think about expanding your career horizons, that are also productive to the end of potentially getting on a board.
Oh, that makes sense. What is the process? Okay, let's say, actually, before we even get there, I guess it kind of ties in. What is the process, and how do I make myself stand out? How do I know what I'm looking for?
So yeah, why don't we start with what people are looking for?
Great.
Members. And so I'll tell you a little bit about sort of now how I've looked when I've hired board members for my company, but also how we advise clients on, sort of what to look for and what to think about when they're looking for an independent director. And I would also say that most CEOs don't necessarily know what they want until they start talking to people, or they have some theory about it, but then they meet people and that theory morphs and changes.
Right. I always like to say a lot of CEOs, especially founders, don't know what they don't know yet.
That is certainly true. So we before I give you a checklist of things, there's sort of two metaphors we use when we are coaching a client through a board search in terms of, again, like how to think about what they need. The first one is jigsaw puzzle, right? So you have a team, and your team is a mix of your leadership team and your board. And that team is a jigsaw puzzle. What's the piece that's missing? What are you looking for in this board member that doesn't just replicate what you're getting out of other board members, but what are the mix of skills and experience sets that are missing, that are not represented around that table right now, that's helpful for you? The other thing that we sort of use as a metaphor for CEOs to think about is the board as a team. And what's the teammate that you're looking for right now? And there are lots of different kinds of teams out there. And we run through some of these with our clients to think about. And again, there's no right kind of team or wrong kind of team. But for example, if you run the three tenors and you're looking for a new person on your team, you're looking for something very, very specific. If you are running a surgical team and you're missing an anesthesiologist, you need an anesthesiologist. Like you can't go with a nurse practitioner. You can't go with an orthopedist. If you're running a basketball team, you're looking for really good athletes who can all run fast and pass the ball and shoot. And yeah, some of the positions are a little different from others, but you're looking for more, sort of good corporate athletes. So we encourage CEOs to sort of think through like, all right, what is it that I'm missing and what kind of team am I trying to build? So I say that not because that's necessarily helpful in the moment, but more just if you're in a board search process to think about, what the hiring leader, the CEO is kind of thinking about. But then to get to sort of the checklist, there are two things that are the baseline, and then there are really four things that we talk through with the client in terms of experience sets that they're looking for and trade-offs. The two baseline things are board ready, so everything we just talked about earlier, and high performing executive, right? So that doesn't get talked about a lot, but like you have to be really good at what you do, and you are going to be diligenced. You are going to be asked for references, and you're going to be back channeled. And the word has to come back that you are a high performing executive for sure. So assuming you clear those two things, you're a high performing executive, you're ready for your first board seat. There are really sort of 4 types of experience that we ask clients to kind of think through what's important to them, like what's the relative importance of the 4 things. So one is industry experience, right? Where do you have contacts, and where do you have, where have you spent most of your career? So you have instincts around the industry. One is functional experience. So, have you been a CFO? Have you been a head of HR? Have you been a head of sales and marketing? Again, no right answer. It's what puzzle piece is that CEO looking for at the moment? We've done board searches where CEOs are looking for any function you can think of. There's some that come up more than others, but you never know what the missing piece is going to be in a given place. So industry experience, functional experience, customer set experience or customer type experience. So do you have experience with a business that sells into SMBs, into large enterprises, directly to consumers, through a channel, overseas? Whatever sort of customer motion you've been a part of, even if you haven't been a part of the selling organization, right? If you're a product leader, do you have experience in building SMB products? If you're an HR leader, do you have experience staffing an enterprise-oriented company? So customer set is pretty important. And then the last one is stage and stage transition. So have you worked in startups before? Or have you just worked in big companies? Have you worked in both? Have you worked in a company that made a transition, like went public while you were there, or went from being an early stage company to a growth stage company? Have you been at a company that got acquired by a private equity firm? Whatever that sort of stage and stage transition is a really important vector too. So those 4 things, industry, function, customer set, and stage or stage transition. Again, there's no right answer. Different CEOs will stack rank those in different ways, but those are the types of things that we see when CEOs go to write the job spec for what they want for this board member, that they'll really zero in on that and say like, no, I actually don't care what industry the person comes from. I just really want someone who's a sales and marketing and customer success leader who's sold into SMBs before. Okay, now we have our priorities.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that can actually even hold true on nonprofits. When we built out the board for the Center of Women in Business, we actually looked at that. We had some founding board members. And then as we were looking to expand it, we said, okay, what functional expertise, who's had nonprofit experience? We looked at a lot of the same characteristics to ensure that we could scale and grow what we want to deliver too, even though it's mission-based.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. So let's talk process for a second.
Yep. So in terms of like what the interview process looks like, or
how do I find out about these opportunities? And then what is the interview or application, maybe even talk for a second about how different a board resume is or a board bio is than a regular CV.
Yeah, so I'll start with that one, and then go to the other 2. So let's make sure we cover everything. I'm sort of mixed on having a board bio. Again, it's one of those things, probably nothing bad happens from having one. I think the vast majority of people who are recruiting for these roles are just looking at LinkedIn. So you need to make sure everything is on LinkedIn. And it's okay. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, you will see that I was for many years the treasurer of my town Little League. Like, it's okay to put things like that on your LinkedIn profile. It's okay to put the PTA there. It's okay to put a Girl Scout troop leader there. No questions asked. If you are doing a separate board CV or board resume, then you will want to focus on those sort of board readiness things that we talked about. Like, you might not put on your resume a list of companies you've advised and what size and stage they were at and what kind of project or advice you gave them, but you might do that on a board resume. But I would make sure everything is in LinkedIn. In terms of how you find opportunities or how opportunities find you, there's not an answer to that. So certainly networking is good, right? And your network may produce opportunities like that. Then I would say if you divide the world into things you can do proactively and then things that are more reactive, Proactive, there are a handful of sites out there that you should join and become a member of, where they post board opportunities, and you'll have an opportunity to look at them and apply for them. Probably the best one of those is called Above Board. Yeah, it's a great site. I know the CEO well. So that's sort of one option. Joining Bolster is another one, and that sort of straddles proactive and reactive. So that's a good transition. I think Andrea or Kathy will put a link in the chat here of something you can click to join Bolster. Joining Bolster is free. It takes you 5 to 10 minutes to fill out a profile, just so you're in our network. Right now, Bolster works the other way. Clients come in and search and have to find you. In a couple of months, Bolster will also post opportunities so you can look at opportunities and raise your hand for them. And then there are a couple of other really good networks that look a little bit like Bolster, but that are also more on the reactive side, like clients come to them and they have to find you and pull you out. There's one that's called Him for Her, which is a nonprofit out of the Bay Area that we collaborate with on a bunch of things. There's another one called Board List, also out of the Bay Area. Those are both both good organizations. I would encourage everyone to look at them and put their resume and LinkedIn profile in whatever system or database they have. They're a little different than Bolster because you don't really join them as members, but you want them to be aware of you, because those are all resources that companies will turn to when they're doing a board search. They also sometimes turn to headhunters, traditional executive search firms. And you're either in their databases or you're not in their databases. One place that you can put your profile that's used by a bunch of search firms is called notactivelylooking.com. There's another one called New Role that's focused on boards, NUROLE.com. But you should cast a wide net. There's nothing bad happens, again, by putting your profile out in a bunch of places like this. But at the end of the day, a lot of board recruiting does come down to networks and personal networks, and and that's why that networking component really is an important sort of baseline. So that was part 2, and then I guess part 3 is sort of what a board interview process looks like.
Yeah.
What I would say about that is it's an awful lot like an interview process for a senior executive role. You can expect to spend a lot of time on it. You can expect to have lots of different meetings on it. You will typically meet with every member of a board before you join a board, and usually the CEO multiple times, particularly for private companies. Public companies have a nominating committee, so you may not meet with the CEO multiple times, but you might meet with the nominating committee multiple times. It takes a while, and more than a while, it takes a really long time. The reason it takes a long time is, if you can imagine, the finalist in a process has to meet with every single board member. So you have to coordinate the logistics of like coordinating your calendar with 4 venture capitalists and 2 other outside directors. It just takes a while. But you can expect those interviews to look a lot like interviewing for a senior executive job. They're a combination of getting to know you, asking about strengths. Why are you interested in this? What can you bring to the board? Also, you should come to those with plenty of questions, and you should get the CEO or board member talking about, hey, what are you looking for? What's important to you? How do you view the relationship between the CEO and the board? You can get philosophical, you can get tactical, you can get strategic. It's kind of good to show that you have a range of altitudes that you can operate at.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I know we're coming close to time, so I want to give folks the opportunity to ask questions. I still have a bunch of them, but I want to give folks the opportunity. Matt, we had one that came in, and it's really talking about that fine line. If I'm on a board and then they want me to do a research project or write a white paper or, define their go-to-market strategy, where's that fine line between, yep, I'm a board member. I'm talking for-profit private companies, not nonprofit, because nonprofits can be more operating. But where's that line with like, okay, now I think you're taking advantage of me. I know I have equity in this company, but this is really consulting and I make a fee for this on my regular life.
Yeah,
How does
so
that?
no, it's a great question that David posted. The way I would think about it is, are you giving advice or do you have a deliverable? If you're giving advice, like I ask my board members to spend time with members of the management team all the time to give us advice about something.
Yeah.
That's really, and that's like their time commitment is the meeting. Maybe it's a couple minutes to prepare for the meeting, get their head around the topic. If someone asks you for a deliverable, write a white paper, run a research project, that's something that you should not be afraid to charge for. And maybe not a bad thing to clarify before you join a board as well, especially if someone wants you because you have a specific experience set like that.
Yeah. Great. No, I think that's really, really helpful. I also want you to spend a second because it kind of touches on the same thing. I think what's really hard for folks, especially those that have been operators or executives, to make that transition from the doer to the advisor. And so
That's
do you have any thoughts on how to do it? It's a mind shift.
It's a mind shift. And by the way, that's the best part about being on the board. You don't own the problem.
Right.
But it is something actually that we coach a lot of people about becoming a director for the first time is you don't own the problem. You don't have to own you don't have to own the solution. It is a mindset shift. And I would say the only thing you can do is just keep telling yourself over and over again, like when you're in a board meeting, like you are there to give advice. You are there to to give opinions. You are there to give the benefit of your experience. You are not there to own the problem.
No, I think that's helpful.
By the way, trying to own the problem will put you in conflict with the management.
Right. Exactly. What there was a question about public boards. I haven't been on a public board. It's like, when you're just graduating from college and you need experience, you're like, well, how am I going to get experience unless I get experience? So it's the chicken and egg.
Yeah.
And I know you've kind of alluded to this, but let's say, we are a senior executive and we're ready to start doing that. And it by the way, it might have to be in an industry other than what I'm currently doing because I have a non-compete.
Yeah, it could be. So look, there's a quick answer, which is if anyone asks you to be on a board, you should probably say yes. I mean, do your homework, right? You want to be on the board of like a quality company, right? But given how few board seats there are out there and how many people are interested in them, and I can walk through that math if you want. If you have the opportunity to serve on a board of any kind, it's probably a productive thing for your board career journey. But look, public is certainly a little trickier. There are plenty of public board nominating committees that will not look at you if you have not been on a public board. There's not much you can do about that. Being on a private company board is the next best thing. There is definitely, and then being, on a nonprofit or community board is on the list, but further down the list. So private companies might be a little bit easier. We've definitely placed people on public boards that have never been on boards before. But again, they have to be board ready. And, as I said, one of the greatest things, or one of the easiest ways to say you're board ready is you've reported to a CEO, so you've been in the boardroom a lot. And there it actually does matter if you've been in the public boardroom or a private boardroom. So when we've placed people on public boards, it's frequently, and they haven't been a public company director before, at least they've been a senior executive at a public company. The public companies have a totally different set of pressures and operating rhythms and everything else. So you can be board ready for public without having been on a public board. It's a little harder, but particularly at this moment in time, women and people from traditionally underrepresented populations are getting more of a shot at being on a board if they haven't been on a board before.
That's great. No, thank you. I think that's really helpful. There was another question that came through. What is the accountability? And this, I think, is a great question. How do you measure a board member's success? What's the metric? Is there a metric?
That's a great question. Some boards actually do an evaluation process. And it's actually one of the things that Bolster offers to our clients. But very few of them actually do that. So if you're on a board that does a formal evaluation process, like you'll actually get feedback. But I would say the kinds of things that you can try to give yourself a report card on, or ask the CEO, how am I doing? Even if there's no formal process, are number one, engagement. Are you at every meeting? Are you there on time? Are you paying attention? Are you prepared? That sounds dumb. It sounds like, of course you would do that, but you'd be surprised. So, are you deeply engaged? Two, are you constructive? Are you speaking to hear the sound of your own voice? Or when you speak, do your words carry weight? And, you have something meaningful to say about some issues, as opposed to a little bit to say about all issues. Next, are you sharing your, is the board getting the benefit of your experience? So when you interviewed for that board role and the CEO said, hey, I'm looking for someone who is a product expert in crypto, are you actually sharing those perspectives and contributing in that sort of jigsaw puzzle kind of way?
And I would add, are you sharing your network as well?
That was my next one.
I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. Are you making outside connections? Certainly when asked, and even sometimes proactively. And then finally, are you a good fiduciary? Are you doing the governance part of the job well? Are you asking tough questions? Are you an advocate for shareholders? Do you understand what's going on with the corporate charter and whatever relevant laws if you're in a regulatory environment? So, I mean, it's sort of an easy way to put together a scorecard, like that. And I would also say, just to give a little more color on that, when I think about my own boards over the years for the companies that I've run, and I think about, wow, what made different board members stand out? It wasn't necessarily any one of those things. The good ones all did all of those things. But the different directors had different things that through the lens of time that really stand out for me. So, I have one amazing board member who was the best person I've ever worked with in an advisory capacity on colorful metaphors and examples. So when he had a story, it was so vivid that it stuck with the management team for years. So again, I'm not saying you have to go do that. But that's an example of he was a great director. He had the checklist, but that was the thing that, sort of sticks out when I think about him. When I think about another one, I had one director that I refer to as the challenger. If you read the ebook that was in the link, you'll see some of this. This was a board member that really was just pushing me harder and harder and harder to make better decisions, to make tougher decisions. That's really valuable. It may not be pleasant in the moment, but that's the role that person played. Anyway, lots of examples of that, but sort of think about not just how to be a good generic director, but how to be one that stands out in the company's mind.
I think that's really important. And I think, I've seen it more in the nonprofit space than even the for-profit, public or private space. There are board scorecards. And I know we do this at the center with all of our advisory board members as well. And the nonprofit boards that I have served on, we've had it done before. And it's almost like it's not a review, but it's a feedback session. So everybody, even if they don't want it, it's very helpful to have constructive feedback, both what's working and then, hey, how can we improve? And so I think that process is interesting. I've seen it more on the nonprofit side than the for-profit, though.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I
was going to say, Carrie's questions are kind of interesting. So, you can absolutely be on a board and have a full-time job. You can be on a couple boards and have a full-time job. The most important thing to do is make sure your employer knows and has signed off on it, and make sure that happens before you engage in a board search process.
In writing, by the way.
In writing. Or if it's in the employee handbook, that's fine. But make sure you know how that works. There are some companies that do not allow people to serve on outside boards. You should know that ahead of time if you're going to run into that, because that's the recipe for being very frustrated on the back end of it, you and the company you're talking to about helping them. And it also helps you deal with the conflict of interest question. So if you're, if you're talking about joining a board where there is the potential for conflict, you make sure that HR in writing signs off on it. Your boss knows about it and signs off on it for sure. But my view about that, like the people who I've worked with over the years, who every single time they've come to me and said, "Hey, such and such a company is interested in having me advise them or be a director," and they've never asked about a direct competitor. My answer is always, hell yeah, like go, like you will be better professional if you go have that experience. So please go do that. But not every company has that perspective. Amazon will not let you serve on an outside board. It's a bummer because there's some really talented executives at Amazon who would make for outstanding board members who are not allowed to serve on boards.
Right. I think some of the banks have similar rules as well. This has been amazing and super valuable. I know I personally got a lot out of it, and based on the chat that I've seen, many others did as well. I think Kathy or Andrea is going to put a link in as to how folks can sign up with Bolster as well. Matt, any last parting words of wisdom that you can give us?
Don't be discouraged if your objective is to get on a board and it doesn't happen right away. There are not a huge number of board seats that come open every year in this country. I don't know the exact number. My guess is it's a few thousand, but it's a few thousand where there may be a few million people that are interested in those opportunities. So the good news is anything that you're going to do to make yourself more interesting or more attractive as a potential board candidate is going to be good for your career, no matter what you do. But don't be discouraged if they're not fast in coming. Don't be discouraged if you join above board and you look and there are no board opportunities that match for you, or if you join Bolster and don't get pinged for a board seat. Just the law of numbers mean that that it may take a while, but everything you do is going to be good for your career in general.
Awesome. Thank you. Really helpful. A survey will go out. We would love for you all to tell us what more you want to see from the center. There's plenty of information for you to join Bolster. Really, really appreciate everyone's participation. If you are so inclined, again, we offer all of these things for free. If you are so inclined and want to contribute to the Rutgers Center for Women in Business, we, of course, encourage you to do so. To our Student Development Fund to fund future women leaders, or to help put on additional programming with partners like Bolster as well. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the week and try to do a walk and talk meeting if you can, because it's gorgeous. Thanks so much.